Found in the book of 2 Kings, a story that is told of an unrighteous king who was the ruler of Israel. This king got word through the grapevine that the prophet of God had fallen sick. So sick now that they feared he would not survive. So you see now the king burst into this prophet's home with tears streaming down his face. He is scared and he's overwhelmed because this prophet has been the intercessor for God's people. We have not experienced favor because of my righteousness as king. I know who I am. The only reason why God has chosen to do the miraculous things he has done is not because of me, but because of an intercessor. And if only I could just get this intercessor to figure out a way to survive. So this king comes bursting into the house of this prophet named Elisha, and he falls on his knees, and he's weeping and he's moaning, and he gives this inquiry. He says, King, I need for you, prophet, if you could just figure out a way to survive. He says, the horses and chariots of Israel. I'm scared because the enemy is so powerful that it seems as if defeat is imminent and apparent. And prophet, if you could just figure out a way to help us in our plight, don't leave us. No, not now. And as this king is weeping on his knees, the prophet of God decides to rise from his sick bed. He, with his frail body, picks up his walker or his cane, and he wobbles himself over to the eastern window, and he tells the king, King, pick up that bow and pick up those arrows. He instructs the king to then aim his bow and arrow out of the eastern window, and as he picks up the bow and as he picks up the arrow, the prophet with his bony, emaciated fingers puts his hands on the ungodly yet strong hands of the king. Together, the prophet and this king pull back the arrow and the bow, and they release it and watch that arrow fly. As the arrow is now making its way through the air into the enemy's camp, the prophet declares very clearly, he says, this is the arrow of victory. You will have victory in Aphek. God has given you Aphek. And I can imagine the king feeling a momentary sense of relief. And then the prophet then steps back, makes his way to his sick bed, lays down as if it is now all up to the king, looks over at the king and gives him additional instructions. He says, King, I want you to pick up that bow and pick up those arrows with that quiver, and I want you to strike the ground. What do you mean strike the ground? No, it does not mean he doesn't mean that you are to take the arrow and literally hit the ground with it. No, he's saying do what we just did, and I want you to let the arrows fly and strike the ground of the enemy. By the way, this was a declaration of war, for the king or the general would walk over to the perimeter of the foreign territory, release a bow and let that thing fly, and once it hit the ground of the enemy, war was on. In other words, declare war against this enemy that you are so scared of. And do it just like you saw us do it. And as this king gets the instructions, he picks up that quiver and picks up that bow, and he pulls out an arrow and he aims it out the eastern window and lets that arrow fly. The arrow makes its way toward the enemy's territory, but doesn't go as far as the first arrow. He then picks up the next arrow, and as if he's too weak and too overwhelmed, he allows the arrow to pull back on the bow, and he releases it, barely allowing it to fall out of the window. He picks up a third arrow, and this time he pulls it back, and it literally hits the perimeter of the window and falls right down on the ground. And as this king then lets the third arrow fly, he falls to the ground. As if he was too weak to survive going forward with more, he stops in the middle of what he's doing and he starts to weep and moan. And the prophet of God, in a moment of clarity and divine prophetic utterance, he does not sympathize with this ungodly king. Instead, he leans up in his sickbed and with a voice, with a little power and aggression, declares, "King, you sorry rascal. What have you done? I told you that the first arrow was the arrow of victory, and you allow 3 arrows to fly. But king, I'm not impressed with what you have done, for you have more arrows in that quiver. You should have struck the ground maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times, but you only let 3 arrows fly. And what I've come here tonight to declare is that I walk in this sanctuary with a divine expectation. Why, JD, would you dare to believe that you can come into Oakwood University Church and under the unction of God's Spirit declare that a shift is in the atmosphere? Why would you come up with this program pulling together some mighty and amazing men of God and some amazing psalmists and musicians and team up with an amazing pastor and think that God's going to do something different, something amazing, something super spectacular, something different, something that's not nominal, something that's not humdrum, something that's not normal, something that's not run of the mill, but something supernatural? You know why I walked up in here believing God would do something crazy? It's because I looked over at my quiver. And I prophetically and in a spiritual way noticed that the victories of my past were amazing, but boy, God has provided some more arrows. And let me tell y'all something, if I got more arrows, I got more victory. The shift is a shift that has everything to do with being irritated and aggravated with what the enemy is doing in my life. Looking around at him building up his kingdom when I know that my mandate is to tear his kingdom down. And when I see the enemy doing what he's doing and he tries to be intimidating and he tries to come with force and with power, you know what I've learned to do? I've learned to not look at the enemy any longer, and I learned to look over in my quiver. And if I still got some more arrows, that must mean that I got some more victory that God desires me to experience. And I showed up, y'all, with my quiver, and I decided to shoot some arrows. In the name of Jesus, I prophetically declare that an arrow of victory is now making its way over into someone who is tepid and weak, who like the pusillanimous king can't continue any longer. But I believe right now that victory is now about to take place. And I believe that in the name of Jesus, that the arrow of victory is flying into the area of your passion. And the arrow of victory is flying into the area of your verve and vitality. And oh my Lord, I see the arrow of victory. And you know what I've learned? I can shoot the arrow, and what happened in the room affected the nation.
Wow, wow, wow. There it is. There it is. There it is.
There must be a shift in the house of God. A shift from operating with an innocuous, tepid nature into a place of spiritual audacity where I start to walk on a level of supernatural power and authority, and I start to embrace the favor of God in my life. I've come here to declare that there's more victory to be had. And I thank God for the declaration of victory in AFAC. Lord, I released that arrow and he already gave it to me. But can I tell y'all in here that you've experienced some victory that your past victory won't sustain for today? And that I wish that I could come and applaud all of the effort that has been put forth. But God has given me the authority and given me the dictate to come here today to declare that you weak Christian, releasing a limited amount of arrows when God desired you to have complete victory while you're satisfied with partial victory. No. I came here to talk to the one who AFEC ain't good enough. Thank God for AFEC, but Lord, I see some more arrows. And right now, I'm not the only one who desires to let some arrows fly. Is anybody in here ready to stand up and with authority declare with the prophet of God that I'm going to see some arrows fly in the midst of my situation? I'm going to see some arrows fly in my familial disjointedness. I'm going to see some arrows fly in my diseased visitation. I'm going to see some arrows fly in the weak effort that I've been putting forth. God, my enthusiasm ain't gonna be what it used to be. I'm about to take it to another level. And I dare the devil to say something, because all I gotta do is point to my quiver and declare that victory is God's. So right now, if anybody in this place wants to believe like me, that in this atmosphere, the shift is imminent and that I don't want to be satisfied. Who in here wants more of God? Do you want more victory? Do you believe that there's more victory? Do you have the audacity to open up your mouth and say, Jesus, I want victory tonight? There needs to be a shift.